Hey, it's Chase from On the Table Gaming, and I'm joined by my co-host Simon for another episode of Table Talk. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters for making all this possible. So, Simon, what do we got on tap for today?
We are talking about a couple of Kickstarter projects. Now, I know that you're a big fan of Kickstarter, Chase, and you certainly have made quite a few investments in the past. Is that right?
Yes, it's a dangerous game there. You got to be careful not to have too much free time and just scrolling through on my phone. Or
Absolutely.
having friends like you who just send me random things all the time, being like, "Have you seen this?" And it's like, "Oh no."
I like to see them as investment recommendations,
Uh-huh,
because to be
uh-huh.
honest, there are quite a lot of Kickstarters. You can back them, and the resale value on the secondary market is extremely high with some of these projects.
Oh,
So I think a lot of people see these as being very cool ways you can acquire games and with very little risk, especially the exclusive. People really, really like those.
well, if people are watching this as gamers, board gamers, war gamers, they've probably seen stuff or probably purchased something on Kickstarter at some point or time. And so today we're going to talk about two different games, right? That both came through this Kickstarter pipeline.
That's right. We're going to lead off with Massive Darkness 2. Massive Darkness 2 is a more recent project from CMON Games. Basically, it's been very, very successful. Both Massive Darkness and Massive Darkness 2 have been sort of a great hits for CMON. And we're also going to be talking about The Other Side from Wyrd Miniatures, which is a game, I think it's about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it appeared on Kickstarter. Now, each of these games have slightly different maturity levels. The Other Side's out there in the wild, where the Massive Darkness is coming to backers pretty soon. So we're going to understand a little bit more about these projects and maybe understand a little bit about why we like Kickstarters. What attracts people to them?
And of course, we can't do this alone, right? We need to have some guides to help us through this territory. So for Massive Darkness 2, we're going to have the CMON game designers, Alex Altaneu and Marco Portugal, as well as the lead developer, Fabio Cury, talk with us about the game in general. And then for the other side, we've got a really a veteran gamer in Kevin from Three Men in a Wargame, who's going to walk us through and talk us all about not only the background to the other side, but a little bit the lore and the factions as well. So I'm really excited to dive into that one.
Yep, both great interviews. Let's get into it.
Today we're joined by CMON's Massive Darkness designers, Alex Alteanu and Marco Portugal, as well as CMON developer Fabio Cury. So if you're watching this, chances are your gaming experience has been shaped in some way by the collective work of these three individuals. So seriously, I was going to list, all the games that you guys have worked on as developers or designers, and it's essentially like too much to list in one place. So, with all this power in one place, I'm thinking like, I've got all the power combined, kind of like snap my fingers and make a wish, just like half the population going to disappear. I don't know. How is this going to work? But thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Chase, for having us here.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
Massive Darkness 2 is a hugely successful Kickstarter. And fortunately, if people watching haven't pledged yet, you're still accepting late pledges up until March 12th. So let's just cover some groundwork here first, talking about what this game is, in case people maybe haven't already pledged, have already jumped in, or they're on the fence, they're thinking about upping their pledge. Now let's go through some of the content here and kind of talk more about this awesome game that you've made. So maybe Alex, can you give us an overview of what's the basic story or setting behind Massive Darkness 2?
All right, so Massive Darkness 2 is the second game of Massive Darkness franchise, as some of you may know. And on Massive Darkness 1, you play as a Lightbringer, okay? So in Massive Darkness 1, the Lightbringers were able to close one of the portals that were bringing darkness into our world, into their world. So in Massive Darkness 2, what happened is more than one portal appeared, like a few portals have appeared, and then they discovered that more and more portals keep coming, and there's no way to just shut down all the portals. So a group of Lightbringers have to enter the portal and end darkness inside it.
Awesome.
So basically, Massive Darkness 2 is a dungeon crawler co-op game in which players will be playing one hero. We call them Lightbringers. And one of the cool things about Massive Darkness 2 that we changed from Massive Darkness 1 is that each class is completely asymmetric. So each class has its own components and a slightly different gameplay from each other.
Fantastic. So if people already have played Massive Darkness, they played Massive Darkness 1, what can they expect to be like the biggest change jumping into Massive Darkness 2?
Yeah, I think the biggest change that it's what Alex said, that each class is completely different. Not completely different, but they have different components, different gameplay. Like we have 6 classes in the core box. We have the Ranger, for example, that uses a small deck of arrow cards that they use each combat to hit the enemy with more swords and stuff. You have the rogue, which has his own toolkit of bag of tokens that they can use during their actions. So each class has its own unique feeling, you know. That I think that's the biggest difference. Of course, we changed a lot of other things. We have new dice, we have new mechanics, but I think the biggest thing is the asymmetry.
Perfect. All right. And we're going to circle back and talk about later about, you know, how does Massive Darkness 1 and 2 connect? But before we talk about that, so Massive Darkness was originally designed by Guillotine Games, but for Massive Darkness 2, CMON decided to unleash their secret weapons, right? We got Alex and Marco here. So, and you were both developers, right, on the original Massive Darkness?
Yes.
Okay.
We were the developers of Massive Darkness 1.
Okay.
And I mean, Guillotine's already with a lot on their plate, so they decided to give us a chance to design Massive Darkness 2, since we were like very, very involved in the first one, and we like kept track of the community, and we liked to play as well. So CMON go, okay, we can design the second one. I was like, all right,
fantastic. So then Fabio, as the lead developer on this project, you get to work really closely with the game designers. So what makes Alex and Marco so great for this project?
Well, I'd say that firstly, it's always very good to have designers working in pairs, because there is a situation where they might butt heads, but usually they can complement each other, right? And I can see this very clearly with the design choices. And so I think their greatest strong point is that they work together really, really well. And that shows in how smooth and elegant the design is in many aspects.
So you didn't have to like officiate any like wrestling matches or anything. Like it was a pretty smooth process.
No, we always decide by fighting. Like
every fighting. That's the unwritten rule of CMON game development. It's just like a dark room you go into, and all right, fair enough.
It works.
So, Alex, you mentioned earlier some of the cool game mechanics that are present in the game that maybe were even added in Massive Darkness 2. Maybe starting with Alex and then just going around, what are some of the favorite mechanics that you guys have? Things that have maybe changed, or even just core mechanics that people who are new to Massive Darkness should know about?
Okay, so one of my favorite ones is the shadow die that we added on Massive Darkness 2 only. So Massive Darkness, it's a dungeon crawler, but it has something about positioning. Mm-hmm. So that like other dungeon crawlers doesn't have. So when you're on shadow zones, we have like light zone and shadow zones. And when you're on a shadow zone, your hero gets stronger because they were trained to fight in the darkness, so they can fight darkness, you know? So in Massive Darkness 1, you used to get a bonus when you attack from a shadow zone. But now we added the shadow die, which is a purple die that you always roll when attacking from a shadow zone. So this die can give you more mana, more swords. He's really strong, but he has like one face that is your ultimate shadow ability. So if it happens that you roll that shadow face, you get a really, really strong ability triggered. And each hero that we have on the game, like in the core box, we have 6 heroes, but if you pledge the Kickstarter, we're gonna get like a lot more. Each of them has a different ability that it's always related to the asymmetry on the class.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Marco, how about you? Any mechanic that's your favorite that maybe either changed or was a core element of Massive Darkness?
One mechanic that I really like, it's from the first one. We changed it a bit, I will talk about it. But it's the fact that the monsters, they attack with the same weapons that you use. So when you see a monster using a sword, you can kill that monster and get the sword and use it yourself.
There we can see you looking around like that one. I want to kill that one. Give me that.
Yeah. And what we changed is that in the first Massive Darkness, the mob could have any type of item. Sometimes they didn't know how to use and stuff like that. But now we have that special deck of monster weapons that the mob will always use. So they will always be able to use themselves and attack us. And when you kill them, you get them. And the only way you get these weapons from this deck is by killing these monsters. You know, I really like that mechanic. The heroes and the monsters, they attack with the same dice and same weapons.
Absolutely. And then now, last but not least, Fabio, you got the hardest spot now. They said all the easy ones. Now, what's left for you to talk about here? What do you got? Favorite mechanic?
Well, I like to think that, especially from my wargaming background, right? When you're rolling a lot of dice, it's usually hard to keep track of things and what effects apply where. So maybe this is my developer brain, working and saying that one of the things I like the most is actually the very streamlined dice roll, and abilities are clearly shown where they can be applied. And basically, so you roll your dice pool, and if you have reroll abilities and so on, you can use them. But if you decide to use, for example, dice give you not only hits and damage that you deal to your enemies, but they can also give you mana or even the shadow facing, like Alex said. So if you want to use a mana you gained from a dice, you simply just push it to the side. Its facing has been chosen and it cannot reroll, and you can continue to apply other effects. So it's very easy to knit abilities together with the system, with the core system that they have created.
That sounds fantastic. So if you were thinking about like the relative complexity of the game, now a lot of people maybe watching this they're already aware, or they've already played Massive Darkness. But if you were coming over from like a Song of Ice and Fire, right, and you're more from like a wargaming background, we're jumping into a board game here, right? And there's tiles, and it's really tactical, like Alex was talking about, the positioning, the shadows. How on a scale of like maybe 1 to 10, like how complex do you think this game is as far as like learning, right? Not as far as like, a system that has a lot of depth, but if you're going to pick it up like the first time, like how long do you think it takes to play? Is it one of those games where you sit down with a friend and you play it through like one time and it's like 6 hours of playing, and then you're like, okay, now I may be starting to understand how to play it, and like you don't really know how to play until like the second time you play the game? Or is it something you feel like people can pick up pretty quickly?
So, do you want to go?
No, I'd say just for the wargamers out there, if you can play Song of Ice and Fire, you can definitely play Massive Darkness 2. It's completely different, right? But I think lots of the concepts of like understanding how a rule book is read and played out is the same. So I'd say you can actually pick it up pretty easy in your first session. There is an introductory map that teaches you basic concepts. I think that one you can get through in like 30 minutes of gameplay. Wow. But I'd say the first time that you set up the game and you want to play it a little bit slower, right? So the whole experience should take you a little bit over an hour.
That's fantastic.
And after that, it really depends on how much players enjoy and want to pick it up.
What do you think, Alex? Is Fabio leading us in the right direction here? Any comments you want to add on?
I'm laughing because I've played like Song actually sometimes with Fabio.
Uh-huh.
He sometimes picks me for a noob playtester, someone that doesn't understand the game. And have you ever seen that picture of the dog doing chemistry? And I know what I'm doing. That's me playing Song.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So as you can see, I'm the lead designer of Massive Darkness 2. It's like much more simpler. Let's say like this.
Oh, that's fantastic. But it's
Song of Ice and Fire, it's streamlined. I love it. But definitely Massive Darkness 2 is let's say not for a more casual public, but we want it to be friendly with more casual public.
Yeah.
Okay. You can get very deep in the game, and there are some skill trees that are complex and we made it on purpose for more experienced players. But one thing that we changed from Massive Darkness 1 is that on Massive Darkness 1, you started with a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in Massive Darkness 2, you simply start with your ability and one more skill that you can choose at the start of the game. And that's the information you need for start. Rules are pretty simple. like as any other dungeon crawler that CMONs make. It's like you have 3 actions. Actions are pretty simple. You move, you attack, you open doors, and you can trade, you can rest. And as you play, like in 20 minutes, you understand all the rules. The concepts are really basics.
Well, so part of the fun of games like this is that you're getting like different equipment and you're gaining power. So how does the game like adapt to your strength? Or if you get to like a certain power level, you have a certain amount of equipment, you just like burn through the mission. Or if you're playing with like 2 players, is it easier or harder than like playing with 6 players? Or like, does it scale? Marco, could you maybe speak to that?
Okay. We have like different decks for each level that you are. So as you level up, like you start at level 1 and you can go up to level 5 on the core box. And each time you level up, not only you get stronger, you get new skill, you get more health, mana, etc. The monsters also get stronger, and they start to be drawn from these new decks. Like when you are at level 3, you have this level 3-4 monster deck that you start to draw from. So yes, the dungeon becomes more harder as you progress. And for the scaling in number of players, we have this interesting mechanic of you use a number of miniatures in each mob equal to the number of players. So you have like a mob of imps. If you were playing like 2 players, it's the mob leader, the imp leader, and 2 imp minions. But if you're playing with 6 players, it's 1 imp leader and 6 imp minions. And each minion adds a monster die to the pool of dice that they attack and they defend. So the game becomes harder simply by having more players in play, because with more players you have more actions that you can use. So that's how we adjusted the scaling of the game.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we do have the portals as well. So as I was saying, Massive Darkness 2 is about portals appearing, etc. And we balance the game on the number of portals that you have in the dungeon. So if you're playing like, for example, a 1-2 player game, you only have the first portal. But if you're playing like a 5-6 player game, you have 3 portals. Spawning minions and mobs.
Each time mobs will spawn, they spawn 1 in each portal. So with more players, you have more portals.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so if there was some like magical twist of fate and we as a group of 4 were transported into Massive Darkness as our own group of Lightbringers, what do you think the classes would be for the group of us here? What would what would Fabio be? What would Marco be? What would Alex be? What would I be?
That's an interesting question.
You have to choose very carefully. Who's in a more precarious position? Is it tougher for Fabio to say, and who's going to say something you're going to be like, what, really?
I would say Fabio's the Tinker.
All right, the Tinker. Okay.
Yeah.
And why is that? Like, what does the Tinker do?
So but the Tinker is kind of engineer, and I do believe that was Fabio did for us. Like he did the math, he did the balance, he did everything that we couldn't do ourselves. So I think he's the Tinker.
Okay. Fabio, are you pleased with that? Is that a charitable, or is it like, what? I don't want to do that.
Well, I kind of like the idea that the Tinker, since he's very flexible, he's only as good as its player. Oh. So I take that as a compliment. Yeah, for sure.
You know, Fabio was like, I wanted to be the barbarian, the berserker. He's like, I thought I was going to be. He's like...
Just to talk a bit more about the Tinker, he uses the items that he gets to build stuff. Like he can build bombs and construct.
Is that a commentary on Fabio? We should be aware of him.
He has an exo armor that he can build, and it's very interesting. It's very flexible.
Well, I guess if Alex did Fabio, I think, do you have to do Marco then, or how does this work?
We can do that.
I'd say, Chase, that probably you would be the bard.
Oh, really? Uh-oh.
You bring in that good energy, right? And
so tell me more about the bard. Marco, why is the bard awesome? Let me hear about this then. Why is
Well, the bard is the heart of the party, right? Like he gives like bonus to everyone, and when he sings his songs, he inspires the whole party. So
all right, I'll take it there. That's a compliment. What was that? No.
And for sure, I'd say that Marco is the rogue, because he can do so much more than everyone else in the same amount of time. which is just too impressive.
Yeah, the rogue has the token mechanic. He uses tokens from a bag as actions, and some abilities let the rogue to draw more tokens, so he can do more actions than the other classes because of that.
So that's your secret. You just get so much done. You're able to go so fast. Fair enough. And then now, who's Alex here? What do we got?
I think Alex is the paladin, right?
Oh, okay.
Paladin is also a support class, just like the bard, but it's a little bit different because he uses auras on the board, so he chooses where he will put his auras. And I think the paladin has a thing that he knows he has to know every class well, so he can use the auras in a good way. You know, he has to know what the berserker will do, what the heroic will do to be able to use. And Alex has this. He knows the players, in this case, he knows us very well. So he knows what are our good abilities and what we have, what were, how you say that, our flaws. You know, he knows our flaws, and he knows what we can do well. You know.
All right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And actually, I guess that what's interesting, I'd say for the paladin, like you asked us, like, how would you introduce a game to someone? Or I'd say that the person that is doing the demo and teaching the others should usually take the role of the paladin, because then they can better assess what the other players need, and that might actually help give even a better and more positive game experience if they're getting these bonuses tailor-made for them.
Well, and from a game like Cool Mini or Not, it's not surprising that this game comes with amazing miniatures. I think in your most recent designer update that came out like in February 6th, you had a picture of Uriel there, which is just like this epic sculpt. Do you guys have a favorite miniature? And as a side question, at some point, are they no longer minis? This is like this amazing sculpture. It's like a bust almost. It's going to be so cool to paint if people decide to paint it. So, what's maybe a favorite miniature that you guys have in the game?
For me, it's definitely the Reaper.
Okay.
I mean, it's a big miniature. It's a boss miniature. And I really like the approach the artist had on death itself. So that's definitely the one I'll just put on my shelf to show everyone. Hey, that's my game. That's one miniature from my game.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Marco, how about you?
It's really cool. But as far as heroes, I think I really like the Centaur. I think it's Nahayas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Because it's one that we really wanted to have a Centaur in the game, different races,
Yeah.
Because I think Mass Darkness 1 was more like humans, elves, and dwarves, only that. And we tried to bring new types of races to the game. And a Centaur is really, really interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's the Ranger. I really like it.
And the art, the drawings of that is really cool. I saw on some of your publicity stuff, and it's like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fabio, favorite miniature?
I'd say I'd go simple as well and choose I think it's Modron. I butcher these names as well because they're all like these fantasy names. And he's the wizard, and I really like it because when people think wizard, they think like Elijah from Massive Darkness 1, the Gandalf stereotype wizard. And this one has like this completely different approach, and you can still see he's a wizard or sort of like arcane wielder of some sorts, but at the same time wearing this like very flashy clothes. It's very different.
Fantastic. And so the Kickstarter itself has been incredibly successful, right? You're almost $4 million. Did you guys negotiate like a percentage here? Are you guys all driving like Ferraris now, or flying in helicopters and stuff? Is that we don't need to answer that, but that's how it'll be in my head.
I'm retired and I'm just bought my boat, so I'll just travel around the world.
There we go. All right, fantastic. When the game was fully funded, right, and the Kickstarter was successful, it was fully funded. How did you guys feel about the campaign?
Wow, it was a roller coaster, right? The whole campaign. But it's like the Kickstarter is really hard for us, the designers and the developer, because like we work for almost 1 year until the Kickstarter, and it's like where our 1 hour of one year of hard work is put into test. So it's really tense. But when the Kickstarter was like done and it was a success, then we were like so relieved. But the work doesn't end when the Kickstarter ends. So we're after Kickstarter like, oh dude, we have a lot to do yet. So let's just not think about it and let's start working.
So when Alex is out on his yacht now, Marco, what are you doing then? What's going on? Or I guess maybe Fabio, I don't know, but what happens now then?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do right now, right? We have like all the expansions and content that we brought on to Kickstarter. I mean, we were really excited about the results, but we had a lot of work to do as well. But as far as the results goes, we are really excited and surprised at least I was surprised, and I wasn't expect that much of a good reception. It's really good.
Well, yeah, it's been fantastic, and I know people are really excited. So if there's someone maybe who hadn't originally been paying attention to Massive Darkness, maybe they're not as much of a board gamer, but it's kind of been an atypical year. They've been spending a lot of time at home, and they're like, you know what? It might be nice to have a game where I can play this by myself or with my family, and I don't need to carry a whole army and set up over here. Although actually, you do have like legions of miniatures in this game, so maybe not that. But if someone maybe is listening right now or watching, and they're on the fence about jumping in with a late pledge for the Kickstarter, and maybe they've been holding off, just kind of quickly to summarize here, like what might be some of the biggest strengths for this game, and why do you want to have this in your collection, or maybe what's so great about this maybe mixing with other games that you already have in your collection? Why should they maybe jump in now?
You want to go?
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words, if I may. I'd say that the first thing is, if this is Massive Darkness 2 is a condensed RPG adventure, right? So if you're an RPG player, but maybe you and your friends don't have the time to actually, prep character sheets and, find an adventure online or even make an adventure, like these things are really time consuming. And Massive Darkness gives you that feeling, especially if you're used to using miniatures when you're playing role-playing games as well. So it's really easy to import lots of concepts that you already know, and it works really well. So I'd say that you don't have time for these long, exhausting RPG sessions. This is a very good alternative. I'd also say that it's very simple, and once again, it's easy to learn. Like after you got it, everything is very smooth, and it especially if one person already knows the game, then everyone else is guaranteed a good time. Like any other game, you need to stumble through the rule books first, but if you see a how to play or something, I think it's going to be very straightforward in that sense. And the last but not least are the miniatures. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
That's good.
And especially like, since I know there are a lot of Song of Ice and Fire listeners here today, probably like if you're used to painting a tray of 12 miniatures, and you enjoy that experience because you're giving each of your units like character and a backstory, you kind of have the same feeling with the mobs, right? So when you're doing like the infernal imps or the fire entities, you kind of want to give them each story, and they all have a leader, so it's a different miniature, like different pose, and you have the roaming monsters. So like if you don't play Free Folk and you want to paint some monsters, like there's definitely a lot of cool stuff.
Fair enough. What about if maybe somebody already owns Massive Darkness 1 and they've got all those miniatures already? Why jump in on Massive Darkness 2? Is it like, is there a little bit of cross elements here we can work on?
I mean, I think every element that we have on Massive Darkness 1, we have an upgrade pack for Massive Darkness 2, right, Marco?
Yes, that's one thing that we did for the Kickstarter. If you pledge it, you get an upgrade pack for free that upgrades everything you had from Massive Darkness 1 to Massive Darkness 2, like every miniature. Yeah.
You weren't kidding when you said you had like a whole year of work then. Like, what were you thinking? That's tremendous value. That's awesome. Also, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm working from my boat here.
Oh yeah.
No, but honestly, like not just that, you not only you can add every miniature you have on Massive Darkness 1 to Massive Darkness 2, but not just that. We made changes in order to I don't know, fix things that we believe that will make the game better on what concerns balance and other things. And we did big modifications on Massive Darkness 2. Like we create new dices, we change tiles, etc., things that change gameplay. So you also gain all the Massive Darkness 1 quests revised for Massive Darkness 2. I don't know if you were, but we did create a campaign box, which is called Heavenfall. You can also get it on Kickstarter. So if you get the Heavenfall box, you also Massive Darkness 1 becomes a campaign as well. That's which fantastic. We call the prologue. So, not just that, we chose some miniatures. We added a new thing on Massive Darkness 2, which is the boss fight. It works a little bit different. Okay, it's focused on fighting a boss. That each one of them has like a unique mechanic that you can deal with. So we chose like three or four miniatures from Massive Darkness 1.
It's 4 miniatures because one of the bosses is using 2 miniatures.
Oh yeah, one of the
bosses.
Fight. But you gain three boss fights using the miniatures from Massive Darkness 1.
That's fantastic.
So yeah.
And then we've only got till March 12th to jump in on this. You guys have done amazing work. I know you've been working hard for a long time, and it's been an interesting year as it is. And there's, it sounds like still work that you guys are doing, burning that midnight fuel there. What's on the horizon for Massive Darkness 2 in these kind of final weeks, or any other big future plans or projects that you guys are working on?
So for Massive Darkness 2 now, we actually are finishing things that like Massive Darkness is almost delivered. And like in these last weeks we just like keep play testing, change minor things, but basically that's it. Massive Darkness 2 is done. And
I'm not sure we can talk about the other projects.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So you just take a little time off maybe and sail around on your yacht and
I wish.
Fair enough.
I'd just like to add that Massive Darkness 2 is not done. There's a lot more on the horizon in terms of online content and support for the game and so on, right? What we mean is that Massive Darkness 2 as its core experience is delivered, right? And it'll soon be at people's houses and so on, delivered from a development end. I'm trying to cover all the ifs and buts there.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk with me today. And big fans of everything you guys do, especially, everyone at the company is great, but I've been loving the stuff that you guys have been doing, especially, whether it's some of the other games that you worked on, Project Elite or Hate or A Song of Ice and Fire. We're really looking forward, and we're kind of following your names as you guys are working on new projects. And so we're looking forward to seeing a lot of great new stuff in the future as well. So keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you, Chase, for having us here. And I really like to talk about Massive Darkness. So.
I can tell.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right. And we're excited, and we look forward to getting our hands on it and getting our miniatures on the table. So obviously backers are really excited about getting their hands on the Massive Darkness 2 Kickstarter. And if you haven't backed it yet, they are still accepting late pledges until March 12th, 2021. So we've got about a month left at the time of this recording. But this is kind of a new game coming out. We have a kind of an older traditional war game. And, it's a little bit different having a war game versus a board game, right? That's a kind of self-enclosed. And so there's a little bit of a difference in the lifespan or that experience. So what do we got here with the other side?
Well, the other side was on Kickstarter probably about 3 years ago. And At the time, it was a very exciting project from Wyrd Miniatures, and I think it's a great game. I'm going to say that. And what we're doing is we're covering games, and we're calling it our Dead Game segment, which is grossly unfair. This is not games that are dead. These are games that are unsupported, but we believe offer tremendous value to anybody willing to explore something which isn't mainstream. Maybe try something a bit different. This is your hipster games. These are the ones you can pick up for pennies, and you can get... Well, obviously Chase likes it. So, but you can get so much value from. So the other side was of interest to me. What happened is that Malifaux 3rd edition kind of got leaked around the same time, so it suffered from that a little bit. But this was more of a hybrid Kickstarter project where the intent was to get it out to people with a Kickstarter, to enable stores to get into the Kickstarter, and then to have product on shelves. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happened with that game, about the game itself and how it plays, and maybe look a little bit to the future as well.
So I don't know very much about this game, so I'm excited to learn some more. And we've got Kevin from 3 Men in a Wargame here. So let's jump on over and find out more. So Kevin, thanks so much for joining us on Table Talk.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here, you guys. And we're talking about one of my favorite games.
I know, I'm excited. This is a little bit of a newer one for me. And so it's sort of bittersweet to be talking about this really seemingly cool game that maybe, is in an interesting place. But before we jump into it, let's talk a little bit about, what you're involved with. And so you run a podcast called 3 Men in a Wargame, and you just did your 95th episode. So you guys have been at it for a while. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of those projects that you've been in?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I run it. I say like I'm the hype man. Like I'm the Flava Flav of that podcast.
There we go.
I am the one that gets super excited, and I'm the one that's very slow to criticism of games. I like to see the best things in games. And our ethos, well, first of all, I should say the way we got together is I've been friends with one of my co-hosts for over 10 years. And we've always played World of Warcraft together. And like, even though we live across the country, we've always shared a love of war games and always talked about it. And we thought one day, why don't we just like start talking about war games and release it and see if anybody listens? And then now, yeah, like you said, 90 plus episodes later, you can see the fact that we don't really stick with one system. We like to dabble and play in lots of systems, even though there's some consistency across what we play. Like I think we have a few staples, but for the most part, you'll see us blowing tons of money and trying every cool system that comes out.
That's awesome. So you bring a depth of experience to this conversation, and we really want to pick your brain about this game, The Other Side. For those people who maybe don't know what The Other Side is, how would you maybe describe this game in general, like flavor-wise even?
So the first thing to note is this is a game by Wyrd Miniatures. So those are the producers of Malifaux. Now, I'm also going to assume that a large part of the audience doesn't know what Malifaux is. So going into the setting, think turn of the century steampunk. And before the turn of the century, long before, there have been periods of time where there's been a breach in reality that's been open. And on the other side of that breach is a city and also reality that people on Earth refer to as Malifaux. There's a lot of magic in Malifaux, and the really important MacGuffin is that there is a resource in Malifaux called a soul stone, which is a kind of like a rock, or a crystalline rock that can capture the souls of things that die near it. And that soul stone can be used for magic. It can be used to power autonomous. It's like the MacGuffin, right? If it can be cool and it can be done, the soul stones can power it.
Sweet.
And
that sounds awesome.
The other side is actually a double entendre, because it is both. It's a game about what happens on Earth, because Malifaux all happens on the other side of the breach. When you're playing Malifaux, you are on the Malifaux side of the breach playing. And when you are playing the other side, you are playing on the Earth side of the breach. But it's a double entendre because one of the core mechanics in the game is that every unit in the game has two states. They have their standard state and their glory state. And the way that the rules refer to it is that you flip your card to the other side when you reach your glory state.
Oh, I already like this a lot.
Yeah, it's got a pun in it. Chase is going to love it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes. Oh
yeah.
Man.
And so I think that's like the 30,000 foot view.
So
Okay.
when did you first hear about The Other Side, and how'd you get into it?
Longtime Wyrd player. One of the first games when I got back into wargaming like 2014-ish. And one of the first games that I got back into wargaming with was Malifaux. And I jumped in like body first, right? It was like I just belly flopped into Malifaux and bought like an entire faction, started getting deep into tournament play. And I would have even called myself a Wyrd fanboy at one point, maybe less now as I've expanded out and tried more games. I still have a huge amount of respect for the company. I still play Malifaux competitively, but because of that, like my attention was laser focused on a new game that came out. So when they were launching a new miniatures game, and it was their current designer, so Aaron Darland was the designer of Malifaux at the time, and I knew everyone in the community, in the Malifaux community, knew it was his game. It was a game that was all him, everything that he learned from designing Malifaux, and I was just pumped about it. Also, the fact that it's a company scale game, so rather than Malifaux, which is 6 to 10 miniatures, we're talking about 45 to 70, which I think is a range you're more comfortable with and you know a little bit about, but that's like the range of figures that you're going to have.
So if you're a Song of Ice and Fire listeners, you can maybe see some crossover here. Maybe we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
So, given this sounds great and a lot of fun, why is this a dead game? Well, why is this game something that people feel is not sort of cutting or bleeding edge at the moment?
Yeah, I think Wyrd would be disappointed to hear us call it a dead game. And I think the community might call it dead, right? It's because if a game's not being played widely, it's not necessarily living per se. I would say it's in a weird place of support right now.
Appreciate that.
How did this game come to be then in the first place then? So I understand there was a Kickstarter where this first launched.
That's correct. Yeah, they brought it to Kickstarter, and they raised a decent amount of money, almost I guess it was like $400,000.
Okay,
that they raised, it looks like there it is right there, 337,000. So not even. And I think maybe people were concerned that it was, Wyrd probably wanted the game to do better. I don't think that there's any way to get around that fact. And I think people were concerned that it was they were touting it as a new style of plastic. And people didn't know what to expect of that new plastic, and also pre-assembled minis, which is also very weird for the Wyrd community. If you know anything, like there's jokes, right? Like people will complain on Games Workshop sites, like, "Did you try this model? I can't believe how hard this was to put together." And people will be like laughs in Malifaux because like minis are notoriously difficult to assemble. So people were very, I think, cautious because it was a brand new format for them with pre-assembled plastics and also a brand new plastic recipe.
What did you think of the plastic yourself when you actually got the models?
I'm iffy on it. I think I both love and hate it. I love it because I can, like, if I have a painted and varnished model, you guys, I can throw it against the wall and I'm not concerned about it. It will not break. This plastic is indestructible. Like, and I'm not kidding. Like, I could just full strength pitch a model into the wall and it would be fine. Like, I would be more concerned about the wall than the model. That being said, the plastic is a little bendy, and so you can have really like problems if you have a gun. A lot of your guns come out of the packaging warped and you have to unwarp them. Also, it can be hard to make models that have small contact points stick to bases because it's bendy plastic and it doesn't have a ton of structure. So you'll see that there are models that people have reinforced themselves in their basing to work better. And then again, you have to repose your models a little bit with either hot water or a heat gun to get them to looking proper before you can, play and be proud of them.
Yeah. See from the screenshot here, these models are pretty intricate, and obviously
you
can see where they're going to bend, But the definition is good on these, is that right?
That is correct. Like the definition, like these renders are actually shockingly close to the definition of the final models. Most of them are dead on, like just right on for the level of detail, and the details are cut deep. There's only a few models that I like. The Siren, which is one of the commanders for the Gibbering Hordes, has some issues, but for the most part, the models they have deep cuts, great level of detail, and they paint up wonderfully. Like they take paint really well.
That's incredible. So we're looking at the Kickstarter here, and I noticed there's a whole variety of different models, and they're based around different factions.
Yep.
So let's bring the first one up here. We've got the King's Empire. Can you talk a little bit about what these guys are?
Yep. Before we talk about the King's Empire proper, let's say that the other side has two main sides. You have the Malifaux side and the Earth side.
Right.
And then each of those sides has two allegiances within it. So these are these two factions. So our first allegiance is the King's Empire. So the King's Empire is Britain. But what had happened before the King's Empire came is that there's a faction in Malifaux called the Guild, and the Guild of Mercantiliers is what they are. Is they control the Soulstone trade, and I mean with an iron fist control it. And their seat of power was England up until a very short time before where we are in the time period of the other side, and England has only recently reestablished its own sovereignty in its nation, and the King's Empire is its return to sovereignty. So we are looking at, you think like just before what would be World War I era England with mechs, right?
Yeah, I just saw the Titan here.
Yep. And so that's another thing in Malif, or in the other side, is that you have Titan units. So Titan units are units on 120 millimeter bases. They typically stand between 6 and 9 inches tall. This one and the Gibbering Hordes ones are the most physically impressive. I sent you guys a picture, so we'll maybe see it later. It is a huge model. But yeah, it's a giant mech, and it does what you want a giant mech to do. Like it has an ability, you guys, where it can kick a model, and if it kicks a model hard enough, your friendly units near it will go to glory because they're just like, yeah,
that's awesome.
In fact, we have your models here.
Yeah,
These
they are
incredibly impressive, I must say.
Thank you. And you can see, so the models that are below are 32 millimeter models, so 30 millimeter true scale. And that gives you an idea, it anchors how large the King's hand is. It's a very big piece of plastic and pre-assembled, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, that's always a nice touch as well. Although I can see some people who want to airbrush get a bit frustrated and having to try and get in some of these nooks and crannies and things like that. But you've done admirably here. This is an incredible looking squad. So well done.
I love the scenic bases too. That kind of very reminiscent, for those of you that are watching that are Song of Ice and Fire fans, kind of harkens back to that as well.
And it's actually closer than you think too. And when we start talking about core mechanics, we'll get into it. But yeah, each model represents a unit. So that's a model, a wound. So that is a very similar concept to a Song of Ice and Fire.
Perfect. We'll just flip through the other factions here. Next up, we have Abyssinia.
Yes.
Abyssinia, sorry. This is the one I picked up yesterday. I managed to get the Allegiance box here for $25, which I thought was incredible. So looking forward to getting that one on the table, Chase.
On the other side.
So these guys basically are very sort of, they've got all the technology, it seems.
They do. And so the Abyssinia actually was there was a breach in Abyssinia before there was a breach where the current breach is, which is about New Mexico, approximately. And they didn't really tell a lot of people about the breach, right? I mean, people knew, but they were the previous controllers, sort of like, I mean, before the current breach being open, they were the only ones who had a strong supply of Soulstone, and they have had it the longest. And since they've had Soulstone for the longest, they are the most familiar with what can be done with it and have the most technology. We actually refer to them as Wakanda because they're very close to Wakanda. If you think about how Wakanda is in the Marvel universe, Abyssinia is basically Wakanda.
I really like these guys. They got some fantastic units. I love the mixture of like sort of technology, and you've got sort of horses and stuff mixed in as well, which is great. So
I love that too. That sort of like mixed firepower feel. And Abyssinia is great because they are the high tech faction, and they're one of the only factions that like the defining trait for them is that they have Titans that act inside of squads. Generally, you only have your individual unit Titans, but there is a mechanic that allows different units to be attached to a larger squad. And you can see there the Steel Legion and the Mechanized Infantry both. Those comprise of 3 plug bases, 2 of them with infantry and 1 of them with a Titan. And that gives the Titan some unparalleled resilience because of the way the rules of the game work. And it also means they have like a very unique play style in that they have very different actions that the models within their fire teams can take or their squads can take.
The way you're describing this, it does seem that the game itself has a lot of different moving pieces here. It appears to be quite a deep game. The rulebook is pretty meaty. Is that the case when you actually play this game? There's a lot going on.
So here's where I like to think, like when you think about rule books, a lot of times you'll pick a rule book and be like, how much of it is actually the rules and how much is the fluff? And the rule book, the core rule book's big. It's a big book, but the main rules themselves are about 40 pages.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if we contrast that to a game like Infinity, where the rules are 200 pages, if we can contrast it to Malifaux, where they're about 95 pages. So it's got a little bit more rules complexity than the Song of Ice and Fire does, but not by much. I would say generally by your third turn into the, and not even that, maybe your second turn into the game, you've pretty much got the game. And the other thing that's really good about this game is it handles intuitively. The way things you would figure work, that's the way they generally work. So once you start to understand it and you start to gain some incremental knowledge of how the Wyrd systems work, it starts to make sense and click into place, and things generally work the way you would imagine they would.
Awesome. Let's go through some of these other factions as well.
now
So
we're
we're
to the
going to the
Malifaux
Malifaux
side.
side a bit now. We've got the
Yes.
Cult of the Burning Man, and I actually really like these guys. These for me are the closest to sort of like pure Malifaux models that I've seen so far.
I would say so. So the brief view of the Burning Man is there's a figure on the Malifaux side, just basically the general of the guild, the guy who ran the guild on the Malifaux side. It's a little bit of an Icarus story. He was trying to channel the power of what's called one of the tyrants in Malifaux, which are like the biggest beings there are possible, and ended up fusing himself with a magical power that neither he could contain nor could the magical power actually fully overtake him. Disappeared. No one knew what happened. Huge explosion. Lots of people died. And now every once in a while over the skies, over the skies in San Francisco, over the skies in London, this burning visage will appear over the sky. And there is cult-like behavior and warping of reality around wherever the Burning Man is. And the Burning Man is actually, we'll talk about it when we talk about the next faction, but he's actually the reason that the other side sort of starts as a game. Like he is the reason that starts the events that begin how the story of this game unfolds.
Okay.
But you can see the cultists below him and things that have twisted to his will. So you've got your warped, your doom seekers. One of my favorite models is the ECB Black Ops. So these guys are like, they were intelligence it's basically, these guys were, there you go, the Extraordinary Cases Bureau. So think of them kind of like BRP, right? So the guys from Hellboy, they're like looking after the weird stuff that's happening. But then they start to listen to one of the madmen, Ephraim Wade, and they're starting to think, you know what, maybe there is something to this Burning Man stuff. And then they lend their intelligence, expertise, and technology to the side of the Burning Man. And they're actually one of the scariest units in the game.
This is great. And I can tell just from you talking about this, that there is so much depth here, not in the game itself. Well, obviously you're in the game, but also with the narrative, with the story elements as well.
Oh, yeah, so much. And if you're curious at all, I would say any of your listeners, any of your watchers, go immediately look at the Breachside Broadcast. It's a podcast put out by Wyrd, and it is done sort of radio novella style storytelling. They take the lore and they do dramatic readings of all the lore, and that's all the way back to Malifaux first edition up through current and including other side lore. So if you want to read, if you want to hear about the other side, you look for the episodes that are labeled Earthside Echoes, and that is the lore for this game being read out loud.
That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. What
Super
a cool
cool
idea.
So the final faction we have is the Gibbering Hordes. And for these ones for me is, I must admit, when it's just monsters, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure, but these are pretty cool. They've got some good things going on. I really like the frenzy for sure.
Yeah, and so I actually want to talk about the coolest thing about this faction. So this is the Gibbering Hordes is the Horde faction, unsurprisingly. But the way that this game works is that, you know, if you think about a Horde faction in normal game, even a Song of Ice and Fire, you think about the Free Folk, you've got to buy more models than you would for other armies. It just requires more. If you think about Tyranids in 40K, right? Tyranid armies or Orc armies are huge. But the Gibbering Hordes, they just play with the game's reinforcement mechanic. And the way that it works, you can't table the Gibbering Hordes. In there, it's impossible to table them because as soon as a unit's all the way off, it can reinforce from its own board edge.
That's awesome.
And so their mechanic is that they have low armor and they're easy to kill, but they never stop coming. You just wave, and you have to figure out how to last against the endless numbers of the Gibbering Hordes. And that's the way that their core mechanic plays out, which makes them very different from all the other factions in the game, and actually very different than factions from most war games. But the way that these guys got to Earth is the Burning Man appeared over London, and the central piece of fiction that starts the Other Side book is called the Battle of London. And what ended up happening is the Burning Man had been floating above the skies of London ominously for a long time, like a period of a month, right? A long time. People were starting to just go outside and gaze, and never, people were like pleading with their family members that were gazing up of the visage of the Burning Man, wondering what's happening. And then all of a sudden, one day, the fabric of reality tore apart. Breaches started to open all over the city, and water came gushing out of it, because what happened is the Burning Man opened portals to the depths under the sea in Malifaux, and the caves and the depths. And so everything that came through those things, and these geysers of water that were coming out of the sky, just, and you think about it, right? Like, think about like how physics work, right? If you opened a portal underwater, the amount of pressure, right? So it's just like tons of stuff being thrown out, and these things are hungry and pissed. So now they're on that, and that's that first central piece of lore is the King's Empire dealing with the fact that like all of these things have just appeared in London, and they're hungry.
Yep.
And then fighting them back to the ocean.
Well, I think these models are hungry and pissed personified.
Yeah, they look amazing.
Much better than this.
Yeah, they are hungry and angry.
That's so cool.
So now getting like super hyped. Okay, this, like, the lore sounds amazing. The miniatures look great. So, you know, if you wanted to get into this game, you know, Simon just talked about picking up a kind of a bargain sale on some of these miniatures. How does one go about doing that? Is there a starter set? You know, what's the best way to kind of get your feet wet and start building up?
It is an Allegiance box, and pardon me here for a sec. So I'm actually we'll preview a little bit of what Simon actually bought, because I actually happen to have the Abyssinia box.
Oh, there we go.
And that gives you an idea of the size of the box. So when you buy one of these boxes, it comes with one commander. It comes with 3 squads. So you get 1 commander and 3 squads, and the 3 squads in the box, plus the cards, which are upgrades and basically assets, and then the stratagem cards you need to play the game. You can make a legal 25 script list with the commander.
What's a typical size? Is 25 like significantly on the lower end, or?
So it's actually, so it's funny that there isn't the game size is by commander, and the different commanders bring different amounts of script. So your standard commanders bring 25 script, but there are stronger commanders like the Horo Matangi, which only has, I think it's 22 script.
Gotcha.
But it's also a significantly stronger model. And so when you hire 2, you get 50 script to play with, and then that's how much you can hire into.
Oh, sweet.
Is there like a list builder online for this then, where you can create your own squads?
They're working on it. Wyrd is working on an app. They actually, I think Wyrd's app, Infinity's Army Builder, and CMON's Ice and Fire Builders are the benchmarks for me. All 3 of them are incredible. And Wyrd does a really good job with the Malifaux builder. So I'm hoping that when the TOS builder comes out, it'll be really great. But all the cards are available on the website, so you can download all the cards if you'd like to. And then the way that I list build is kind of like how I used to. Well, first of all, when you build lists in the game, you typically, if you bring to a tournament, you bring however many commanders you're allowed to bring, plus a certain amount of script. Like generally you can bring 3 commanders and 100 script. That's like a standard format. And then at the table, once you know your opponent and the operation, then you hire. So then you're saying, I'm taking these 2 commanders with this 50 script of models. But usually the way that list building works, like when you're theory crafting, I just like put the cards out in front of myself and list build that way. And since all the cards are available online, you can do it that way.
Sweet.
So the cards are available online. How can people get the rules?
The rules are also free online.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's fantastic. Oh my gosh.
What's stopping us? You know, we've got tons of models.
While you were talking, some of the lore, I just kept thinking like, oh, I could pick up a box of these for one of my buddies and I get my own set. We could just start playing for fun.
Yeah. Now, if you want the lore, you have to pay for it. That's I mean, you can listen to the podcast. That takes longer, right? You have to sort of listen at that pace. But if you want the book, the big main core book, I think it's $50 at retail. It's usually you can find it for around 30 online. And it's a honking book. I mean, you saw me pick it up. It's a big hardcover, and 80% of that book is lore and cards. Like the cards that, and I hate doing this on camera. It's like bad, but you can actually see the cards are included with a huge lore segments about the characters. Oh, wow. So you get all the cards and all the lore and all the stratagems and everything you need inside the big core book. So if you bought the core book, it has all the resources you need.
And I think to pick that up next.
Yeah, I mean, gosh. And speaking of kind of like getting into it, so coming from the kind of a Song of Ice and Fire background, right? How easy of a transition do you see this being? Like as far as moving, like Runoff being pre-assembled, I think for a lot of people, coming from a Song of Ice and Fire, that actually is a big plus, right?
Yep.
So any other things that you see as like kind of maybe easy transition points?
Well, I want to actually get at one of the big transition points that maybe is off-putting to people, and that's that there's no dice in this game. We haven't mentioned that yet.
What? Oh my gosh. Okay. Is it even a war game then if you don't roll dice? How does that work?
So you have a fate deck in Malifaux, which has, or Malifaux and the other side, which has 4, and there you go. You can see a picture of a fate deck. And your fate deck has your 4 custom suits. So crows, tomes, rams, and masks. And then you've got your jokers as well, which is your red and your black joker. So it's a standard deck of cards just with different suits, and then the face cards are just transplanted to their values. So rather than a jack, you have an 11.
Okay.
So you've got your cards 1 through 13. Your red joker is your value 14 card, and your black joker is your value 0 card. And the way that the core mechanic in Malifaux and in the other side works is that you have a stat in the other side, it's called your acting value, or AV. And when you're dueling, you and your opponent will have your different AVs. So if you're on offense, you'll maybe doing your shoot AV, or for against someone's defense or willpower. And then you both flip a card off the top of your deck and you add that to your AV, and that is your duel score.
Okay.
And then there's lots of ways to mitigate it, because there's also a control hand, which is you can spend resources to draw cards into your hand, and you can do what's called cheating fate. And so if you don't like the card you flipped off the top of the deck, you can cheat a card in. There's also a resource you have to spend called tactics tokens. And you can spend a tactics token to flip a second card off the deck and then pick the one you'd rather have. So there are ways to mitigate it. And then now I can see, like right now, I know there are some people who are really good at math, and they're like, wait a minute, that's a standard array, and it's a swingy standard array, 1 to 13. That's really scary. But I want to assuage that, because there is also a curve that's used. It's different than the curve in Malifaux. In Malifaux, you have what's called weak, moderate, and severe, and those are in different bands of the cards. And in the other side, the way it handles it is called margins. So the margin by which you win affects how much damage you can do. So like if you have a successful hit come through, then you have to flip for what's called penetration, and you add the strength of your attack to the card you flipped. If you beat their armor, you do 1 damage, which is 1 death off of whatever you're firing at. And then for every 5 points in margin above that, you do an additional damage. And so those big swings in numbers don't matter as much, because generally the margin will help.
Got it. Yeah, I really like the idea of having non-dice mechanics. There's plenty of games that kind of touch on that. I know Bloodborne is one, Michael Chenau's game from CMON. Basically use the cards as the currency, both for movement and attacking. So when we see games like this, it's immediately of interest. I was telling Chase earlier that once, about a few years ago now, I walked into a game store to play 40K. And we were getting set up, and it took a while because we didn't really know the rules that well. And we looked over and we saw these 2 guys playing Malifaux, and all had the cards and stuff. And I looked over and thought, God, I really wish I was playing that. That looks really cool. It was a pretty long game, but it was very dynamic. I liked the small board. They had tons of terrain, and just that card mechanic made me think, there's so many ways you can play games that I haven't really experienced yet. So for me, this is exciting. Anything that feels new, but also is familiar in a way that used cards before, having your own hand and maybe trying to predict what an opponent is doing. It's not only are you working with sort of randomization, but also patterns in other people's behavior as well, to see potentially if they do take risks, or if they are safe.
And also, if you're like me and you're a lore hound, the cards and the suits actually mean things thematically. So there's a concept in both Malifaux and the other side called triggers. And what that means is when you flip a card, it's not just the number in the duel. The suit also matters, because you'll have cards and you'll see an attack, and then below the attack, you will see the symbols for the different suits. And if you meet that suit color in your duel, you get an additional effect in your attack. And those are called triggers. And, you know, we'll say you have your tome trigger or your crow trigger or whatever it is. And generally, like, masks represent magic. Crows represent randomness and bad things. In Malifaux, it's tied to the resurrectionist faction. Tomes are knowledge, rams are brute strength, and the triggers represent that. So if you have something on a ram trigger, it's usually giving you more strength. If you have something on a book trigger or a tome trigger, it might be something that allows you to draw additional cards or flip additional cards or do things that are smart. And so it's like the lore is so deeply tied into the core mechanics, and the core mechanics themselves are rock solid. So it's very cool. To your point there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use the term dead game kind of jokingly to describe games where people kind of think that they're not a thing anymore. Maybe unsupported games might be more accurate. Normally that comes from a position of ignorance because they haven't really tried the game before, but there's certainly a story to be told here. What's happened to the game for it to be seen to be that by people in the gaming community at large?
So it's complicated. And I think there's two main factors that we should talk about. One of the factors is that this game launched when the release for Malifaux 3rd edition was leaked. So it was at the end of Malifaux 2nd edition. I think people were curious, and we all saw Malifaux 3rd edition coming, but just it was a matter of when. Right. And then the game got leaked just before the other side started to ship.
Gotcha.
And because that happened, I think that caused a lot of uncertainty, both around Malifaux and around the other side. And people were concerned enough about Malifaux that they weren't trying to dive into another Wyrd game at the time. The second part of it is the retail launch of the other side was rocky, and that the game's standard size is 2 commanders, and it was very hard for people who didn't kickstart the game to get that second commander for months after the game launched. And it was one thing to launch with 4 factions. That's really impressive. But the problem is, if you don't release with what would be considered the full game size, even having 4 factions doesn't really matter that much. And by the time they got everything out, Malifaux was starting to hit its stride again. People were actively beta testing it. People were excited about it. And then it launched. And at that point, the other side had mostly been forgotten about and mostly dropped for people that were hyped about Malifaux 3rd edition. Because, I mean, Malifaux has a both dedicated and large, rabid fan base. And people wanted to play with their Malifaux stuff as new toys, right? Everybody had a whole edition worth of new toys to play with. And the other side kind of just fell to the wayside.
I think you've highlighted some points that we've seen time and time again in the gaming industry: distribution issues, timing issues, leaks. These all really have such an impact on how we experience games. It can be so disruptive to an organization to go through these development cycles to develop this incredible game. And then ultimately have, the production of some really, really cool looking miniatures. And then for when it gets into people's hands, ultimately things change. And I think that's potentially one of the downsides of a Kickstarter campaign, that there is this lead time. And it does invite this additional risk to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So with this in mind, then, obviously, there is a dedicated fan base for this. Could be larger. But can you talk potentially about what can happen in the future? Because I've seen some articles online where it's talking about maybe the move forward and what that could look like.
Yeah, I think that Wyrd actually has a good plan. Obviously, COVID-19 isn't helping anybody,
right?
Because we can't get out and play at stores. But back at Gamma in the previous year, Wyrd previewed a 2-player starter box for the other side. And we've got a graphic coming up here, I think, and it's featuring 2 of the adjunct factions in the game, the Court of Two and the Guild. So these are basically, think of them as like side or minor factions, or even mercenary factions is a good way to think about them. But there's 2, because Earthside has its own Merc faction and Malifaux side has its own Merc faction. And so they've got this thing, and the clever thing that they've done here is that this box features 2 models as the very important figures in both games. So you've got Sonia Crid, which is the character there on the right, and then Cury and Koku, which is the character on the left of the front. And these are both masters in the game Malifaux and now commanders in the other side. And them and the armies that this box comes with will be playable in both games. So you'll be able to use the models in both Malifaux and the other side. So that will give people that are Malifaux players gives them an incentive to buy it because they're going to have a bunch of what are probably going to be versatile models that they can hire into their crews in the other game, and it makes buying it less risk if they don't end up liking the other side. But also, if you buy this, it's an easy way to have a 2 commander list, because as I mentioned before, you buy an other side allegiance box, you get the 1 commander plus the 25 scripts worth of units. This box is 2 commanders, each with 25 script worth of units. So now you've got a full army after you've got 1/2 of this box and an allegiance box. And I think this could potentially breathe a lot of life back into the game, because you're asking somebody to buy this box and split it and then buy another box with their friend, and they're playing full games.
It's actually pretty clever. It seems like a really smart strategy to address this.
I think it's probably the best they could do, I think it's probably the best plan, and it is weird putting the best foot forward on this particular game system.
It looks like this was in Gamma in 2019. So why is it not out yet?
It's COVID. It was supposed to be released, like people were predicting it around Adepticon 2020. So like we just missed it, like we could have had another moment for the other side. But I think Wyrd made a very wise decision holding it. It doesn't make sense for them to try and relaunch a game into another bad environment. I think it's definitely, even if they're sitting on a warehouse full of these kits, it's best to hold them until they can get people that can instantly buy it, start playing immediately.
Wyrd are a very mature company. They've done this for so many years now. They know what works. They
Exactly.
know their fan base probably better than most gaming companies because of the passion for the source material and the way they develop the narrative here. So they've got a sitting market for this game. It's just getting the timing right and getting the product right and getting it into people's hands. So I agree. I think this is really going to this will breathe a lot of life into the game. My only concern, however, is that how easy will it be to get the other bits that you need? Because coming from Kickstarter and maybe retailers are feeling that this isn't a game they're going to carry. Is that going to be challenging? Maybe not, because Wyrd does have good relationships with retailers, and I'm sure that they'll incentivize them. But there are, again, some additional risk factors here.
Yeah, and it's also like, if you're a retailer that previously carried this game and then had to clearance it off your shelf, like what incentive? Like, it's very hard to resell that game to that store. But the nice thing is, though, that you don't have to carry all the SKUs. If you carry the 4 allegiance boxes in this starter box, maybe you can start the small meta, and then you can start special ordering games. And like, I started a Crisis Protocol meta in my area, and that was how I did it. I got somebody to start carrying the core box and special order all the secondary boxes. And all of a sudden now there are 2 stores that have the whole line, because the community started to grow, and then it grew out of the store I was running the game out of into a totally separate group. And now there's a large community, and the same thing could happen with the other side as long as it's handled properly.
Good. So the final thing I'll touch on is what potentially might come next. We talked about this two-player starter set, but I did see previously when I was doing some research about potentially other allegiances coming down in the future as well. Could you expand on what we're seeing here?
Yes. So we're looking at an image of a unit from the CMON faction, or a faction completely made up of Oni. So if you imagine Japanese folklore, you're going to have like all the monsters, all the things you could possibly imagine coming out there. And it's a faction entirely designed around that. And then that's the Malifaux faction. And to mirror it, there is an Earth faction, which is the 3 kingdoms, which is China, Japan, and Vietnam. They are one kingdom, one united nation in the world of Malifaux and the other side. And it's called the 3 kingdoms. And so those are the 2 potential. So you have like a Far East faction and then an Oni faction to match it, are the 2 potentials. And I can say that's, they're probably not comfortably, but I can say there are other factions too. I can't tell you what they are, but I can tell you that there were other factions in development as well that were really cool. So there was a long pipeline for this game.
I think they just need to find that timing and find their audience, and then they can start moving forward with this type of product. I think this is incredibly exciting, this game. I'm looking forward to sort of just working with the miniatures and just reading the rules initially. I think a lot of people are in that situation right now where they're probably not going to get together and have very many games. It's very hard to find an opponent if you come to a game cold and there's not a community out there. And so I think what you're doing, Kevin, is helping build the community is really key to the success of these types of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, you just need one person, like one person dedicated to a game. If you live in a small to medium sized city, like you can really kickstart it just by like grinding demos. Like that's, I was talking about Crisis Protocol earlier. That's how I got it started. I just went to 2 stores a week and I just stood there for 4 hours. You want a demo? You want a demo? You want a demo? And I tried to schedule myself there when I knew people were playing Warhammer or people were playing another game that was popular at the time at that store, so that I could have looky-loos and people coming over. And that's what you have to do. But one person doing that in an area, if you want to be that person, you buy 2 Allegiance boxes, you start grinding demos, you're going to get someone that likes it.
Yeah.
The game is too good for that not to happen.
So in the meantime, this sounds amazing. The lore sounds awesome. Like there's so many pluses. Where it's COVID right now, right? We're not able to really get together. If you wanted to kind of get out there and you wanted to consume as much information and content, where are some places you would want to look online? You already talked about that podcast that gives us kind of lore background. Are there other groups or places that people should be tuning into?
Oh, most certainly. So yeah, mentioning again the Breachside Broadcast, because I can't hype up Wyrd's own podcast alone. One thing is there's a pretty great group on Facebook. So there it's the Other Side Facebook group is great. Definitely recommend checking that out. Now there's also a podcast called Coordinated Strike that is run by Joe Girard. He was a play tester. He's mentioned in the book. He has a depth of knowledge probably unrivaled of the Other Side. If you go onto the Other Side's Discord, he is the person who's constantly answering rules questions. He is probably like the hype man for the Other Side on the internet. His podcast Coordinated Strike is great. Also, Jeff Yin has a podcast called The Other Coast. Also great, amazing podcast dedicated to the Other Side, like completely dedicated to it. So you have those. And then inside the Wyrd group, I think if you got inside that Wyrd group, I would search the name Adrian Smith. Okay. Adrian Smith he plays a lot of games. I think I've seen him in Kings of War games, or Adrian Scott. Sorry, I misspoke. Adrian Scott. But he paints at a level that is aspirational, but not untouchable. And he's prolific. Like he paints so much stuff and posts bat reps constantly. So you see these amazing, beautiful pictures of painted models and big battles. And it's just really fun to follow his work. So if you look his name up in the Facebook group, you'll see tons of things that will get you inspired to paint and how to base your models and all that stuff. So I think that's my main recommendation. I did an episode about it too with 3 Men.
All right. And so also 3 Men in a War Game podcast.
Yeah.
And if we might segue briefly to that, what's in the future of 3 Men in a War Game?
Well, it's so hard in COVID times. We one of the things that we want to do, one of our big aspirational goals is to run sort of a side event at Adepticon. And have a get together of like-minded people who play the games that we play, and get together and maybe at one of the hotels or maybe get some space ourselves on the floor and then run some fun tables. Also, always in the future for us is hyping up future games. We've got a lot of stuff in the hopper right now for different rule systems. I'm about to get the new 2-player set for Relic Blade. I'm hyped to talk about that. We're getting set to re-record a new episode about the Other Side. Also, we want to record a definitive primer on Malifaux 3rd edition and a total noob's guide to Infinity, because we're all sort of noobs getting into it, and the mistakes that we've made and hiccups that we've had along the way of our road into Infinity. So those are things that we're working on currently.
Fantastic, man. I was listening to your one about Frostgrave, which is the most recent one. So I'm excited to see what's coming down the pipeline here.
We also have 2 episodes on the Song of Ice and Fire, and a 3rd one coming up with the 2021 revision.
Well, we'll push that out there. I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, I'm so pumped for the 2021 stuff for Song of Ice and Fire. But that's what 3 Men in a War Game is up to.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, you certainly were very engaging today. And I must admit, it's incredible to see people who are so passionate and such good advocates of a game as well. I think people at Wyrd should be very happy with the way you've represented the game today. Now, in terms of this particular project, how dead do you think it is? What we're going to do is we're going to have like a 1 to 10 scale here. We're going to try and figure out where we are. Are we on life support here? Or do you think there's a future for the game? what would you give it between 1 and 10? Between it's got a full life ahead of it, or it's going to end pretty quickly? Where do you think we are with this?
No
Well,
pressure,
this is-
but the internet is forever. So
I know this is so. I am of two minds here because I have a group of guys I play with locally that we're going to be playing this game for a long time, and we're all like, I just played a game today with a friend that's in my quarantine bubble, and we like had a great time and couldn't like we were coming up the stairs like, oh my god, I can't wait to play this game again. It's so good. So my head is like, as long as they get this right, we're talking like a 7 or an 8. It's great. It's in great condition. But the problem is that like even the Wyrd community feels like the game is dead. Like one of the biggest podcasts in the Malifaux community, Third Floor Wars, run by Craig Shipman, like one of the best people on the internet. He is an amazing Malifaux hype man. So cool. He is like, and he backed the other side at a high level, like loves the game. And even he's like no confidence. So like, it's hard, right? It's a very difficult position. And I would say realistically 3 or 4 in my heart and 8.
Yeah. I think that passion shows for sure. I think it's incredibly difficult because if you look at Wyrd as a company, it'll be very easy for them to say, well, that didn't work. Let's move on and try something else. Let's make a gateway game into Malifaux, a really easy route for people to get used to using the cards, maybe more like a board game experience. We could knock that out and we could sell a lot and we can basically funnel those people into Malifaux. You're not going to have that with the other side. What you're going to have is Malifaux fans who translate over to that game. I have a lot of confidence in their ability to move this around. But one thing which is important, and what I've learned by doing some research into the subject matter is you don't have to play games which are currently supported to have a lot of fun. And Kevin, you're testament to that. To bring your friends in, to meet up at Gen Con. Maybe I want something where I can control my spending a bit, where there's not a pipeline for thousands and thousands of dollars for new miniatures. So right now, I think it's a great time to basically pick up product while it's being removed from inventories and people want to move it on. Pick it up now and you've got something in your back pocket to have a great experience with a friend.
Yeah, and if it does pick back up, you've got a leg up because you've got product at a price that it might not be available for in the future.
Precisely.
And I can say the whole game system I think is in stock on Wyrd's web store, so they've got supply, and it may be that they're holding some to relaunch the game and do like a soft launch. So if you can get it cheap now, you can. It's not a bad time to try and do it.
Also, I just love your commentary on kind of building communities, right? And COVID has really thrown things for a loop. There's going to be a lot of communities that are going to be rebuilding, and you can get out there and you can build the community you want when things start to open up more. And so if you really want to have an other side community in your local area, like you can make that happen. And sometimes like a game may not be super popular nationally or globally, but like if in your area, everybody's playing it, then great.
Yeah. I mean, my ultimate advice is just because I'm like I'm the guy for a couple games. It's that you ask your FLGS if their distributor can get a game that you're passionate about and if they're willing to special order it. And if the answer to both those questions is yes, the only barrier to getting that game started in your area is you. Yep. Because if you care about the game and you want to be the person that's out there grinding demos, do it. Just like get out there and put them on. Because for me, I've made some of my best friends by just being out there and being available to people and like, showing up with cool miniatures and trying to get people engaged and come over to the tables that I'm at to play games. And as long as you can be a little bit gregarious, you can get people over and you can have a really good time and meet new people and potentially kickstart a brand new scene. So it's hard. I'm not going to act like it's easy, but it can be done.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to wrap things up here and make sure you guys tune in to 3 Men in a Wargaming to hear more of Kevin and the awesome stuff he's doing. And we look forward to kind of exploring the other side and some other potentially dead games in the future. All right. Well, that's fantastic. I am actually really intrigued by that game. Now that I know that you picked up a starter set, I might have to jump in on this as well. But we're getting short on time here. So what do we got in the works for next week?
Next week, we are going to look at some current Kickstarter projects. We do have Zombicide Undead or Alive coming from CMON Games, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. In addition to that, I'm also going to show something I showed Chase earlier this week, which was Heresy Miniatures have a very, very cool 3D printing STL Kickstarter. So I think Chase is on the fence now by getting a
Oh,
3D
no.
printer, but I'm
Oh,
pushing
no.
him harder and harder.
If I do get a 3D printer, just for the record, it's all because of this. Oh.
And another thing I want to speak about is there's the One Ring role-playing game have come to Kickstarter. It's already been hugely successful, and for me, this is really the sort of genesis of how I got into the hobby. I've always been interested in the world of Middle Earth, and I kind of want to see what these guys are doing with this, because even though I've been reluctant to play RPGs for a while, mostly because it's a bit of a cliche sometimes, especially when it's themed around Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to explore this game. I think this is going to be very cool.
Well, let's check it out. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments below what you'd like to see us cover in the future. And in the meantime, hope you get your miniatures on the table.